I know what some of you are thinking. Where is the barista today? And I was tempted to have Jeremy brew me a cup of coffee every single week, but I kind of got in trouble last week, man. You guys kind of got on me for not drinking that cup of coffee, and I'm like, it's hard to drink that cup of coffee when you're, preaching at the same time. So, but if you did enjoy, let me just say this, if you did enjoy a cup of coffee today, and we're all the way out this morning already, which is crazy, but Jeremy brewed our coffee this morning, so this is part of his business and that he's starting up. So Jeremy, where are you? Where are you, my friend? There's Jeremy. So if you look and see back, Jeremy, what's the name of your coffee company? Slow Ride Coffee, man. He's a motorcycle rider, and so Slow Ride Coffee. And if you're interested in some, I'll just promote that a little bit because he donated his coffee this morning to us. So it's awesome, and thank you for that, Jeremy. So we're in this series, man, Hebrews, and Jesus is better, right? Jesus is better, y'all. You're going to get tired of hearing me say this over the next couple months, right? But listen, if you don't get it now, you're going to continue to hear it from me. Jesus is better, right? Amen. Amen. How many in the room would say that you're a competitive person? Oh, all right. Oh, man. I get a little bit of when I'm saying competitive, I'm talking like friendly game night turn championship Sunday. Like, okay, yeah, burn a couple friendships probably. How many in the room are not competitive but would say that, like, here's what your role is? You like to instigate the competitive nature. You're like, oh, I'm going to push some buttons and let them really go, Some of us, however, like, we want no part of competition. You're like, I was the friend that got burned like 10 years ago, so like I've avoided game night for the last 3 decades, right? I'm never part of that. It's interesting because competition is there all the time, right? So, and often when I think competition, I'm thinking like, hey, college football started yesterday, like NFL a couple weeks, like this is baseball getting down to the playoffs. Like I think sports, game nights, those sorts of things. But here's the reality is that there's a competition happening right now, and it's a competition not for a sports game, but it's a competition for you, right? It's a competition between your heart and the things that you desire and the things that you identify yourself as, your affections, your attention. There are things competing for you constantly. And what I want us to do is I want us to see as we begin to look through this whole entire book. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 1 today, and we're going to pick up in verse number 5 where we left off last week. But what I want us to see is that there's always things competing for our heart. And I want us to see that Jesus is better, right? Between all the good things and the fun things that compete for our attention and all the good people and fun people that captivate our desires, like rivals on a field, there's always things competing for our attention, for that top spot, right? Power and authority and bragging rights and beauty and material things. Sometimes we even compete for like spiritual experiences. We're like, oh, I went to this church and I experienced that, and that's what I think worship has to be every single week. As we look at our text today, we're going to kind of wrap up the introduction of the book of Hebrews. And we saw again that Jesus was better than anything, the ultimate ruler, the ultimate revealer, the ultimate rescuer we saw last week. And there was a section in verse number 4 that said at the very end, it said, having become much more superior to angels. Now, we didn't touch on this a whole lot because I knew we were going to be talking about angels in the weeks to come, but it might seem a little bit out of place. But as we kind of continue this theme and we're going to talk about angels and we're thinking about competing and is it Jesus versus angels? And that's kind of a weird thing, but I think it'll make sense as we go through. And if I were to wrap everything in a singular idea, here's what I want you to write down, which I want you to take in your journaling Bible and take to your small group. And when your small group leader says, what was the big idea of the Sunday, right? Then you get a gold star by your name. Many things compete for your heart, but only Jesus is worthy. That's what I want you to remember. If you forget the rest of everything, many things compete for your heart, but only Jesus is worthy. So we're going to start again today, Hebrews chapter 1, verse number 5. We're going to go through the end of the chapter. There's kind of 3 sections. We'll talk about them as we go, but I want to read the whole passage here, all 10 verses, and then we'll kind of walk through it and then look for some application points towards the end here. So here's Hebrews chapter 1, verse number 5. For to which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I have begotten you"? Or again, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, "Let all God's angels worship him." Or of the angels, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. But of the Son, he says, "Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. You have loved righteousness and hated wickedness. Therefore, God, your God, has anointed you with the oil of gladness beyond your companions. And you, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning. And the heavens are the works of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment, like a robe. You will roll them up like a garment. They will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end. And to which of the angels has he ever said, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet"? Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? Now, I mentioned a few things last week that are going to come, and we're going to see this play out a little bit. I told you last week the book of Hebrews has more Old Testament quotations than any other book in the New Testament. Today, in these 10 verses, there are 7 Old Testament quotations. That's a lot, right? So we have to try to understand, why is this happening? Why is he bringing in Old Testament to show us what's going on? And I think that'll make sense, hopefully. We'll see how they all kind of play together. There's also this idea of angels, right? I don't know what you think about when you think about angels. Sometimes you think of the little, chubby baby riding around on a cloud, like, Cupid shooting arrows. It would be appropriate, well, probably not appropriate, but it'd be more common if this was like February and we're close to Valentine's Day and we're thinking about it, right? Sometimes when I think about angels, I think about the Disney movie, Angels in the Outfield. I remember that, right? Helping the kid throw fast and the Angels win, whatever. We all know that God likes the Texas Rangers better. Maybe not, I don't know. There was a movie that came out when I was a teenager called Michael. You remember it? John Travolta, right? I was joking with our small group the other day. I was like, I'm going to probably show a clip of John Travolta as Michael, like dancing in Green Hall just down the road, like I was at Green Hall not too long ago watching a friend of mine play, and I saw the picture on the wall of John Travolta in Green Hall, like with his big angel wings and all those things, right? There's a lot of misconceptions about angels. Some people think that we become angels. It's not what we see biblically. I had a friend that had a family member pass away recently, and they posted something on Facebook that said, like, "Oh, today they gained their wings." And I was like, the pastor in me is like, "Oh, let's be empathetic." And, the theologian in me is like, "No, we don't gain wings when we die. That's not how it happens." So there's a few things that we see about angels that'll tell us about angels. We know that angels were kind of being elevated in Jewish history at this time. There's lots of historical evidence to see that. And we'll see this a little bit more next week as we talk about it, but God spoke through angels to deliver his law and some different things to in the Old Testament. We saw that in the very beginning of this study last week, verse number 1, long ago, many times in many ways, God spoke through many prophets, right? God spoke in many different ways, all temporal, all incomplete, until, if you remember what we saw in verse number 2, God has spoken finally with ultimate authority in his Son, right? In Jesus, we have the final revelation. So I just kind of want to address some of that so we have an understanding as we think through angels. We want to think through properly, biblically, what are angels, what do they do, and what's their role really. So let's talk through the text, verse number 5. For to which of the angels did God ever say? So this is kind of a framework. There's 3 major sections in this particular passage that we're going to look at today. And The first and the last sections are like bookends, and they both start with the same kind of question: for which of the angels did God ever say? This is actually an introduction, a comparison between Jesus and the angels. Which of the angels did God ever say, "You are my son, today I've begotten you"? This is our first quotation from Psalm chapter 2. Psalm number 2, verse number 7 specifically is this particular quotation. Psalm number 2 is actually a coronation psalm. That just means this is a psalm. It's actually pretty fascinating. We don't have time to go through all of it today. Hopefully you'll have in your small group time to read Psalm number 2 and check it out. But here's what's happening in Psalm number 2 is there are these earthly kings and leaders and rulers who are beginning to think a lot of themselves. And they're like, hey, we're going to set ourselves against the Lord. We're going to make ourselves bigger than God is. And it says that they set themselves against the Lord. And then it says in verse number 4 that the Lord looks at them and laughs, right? I mean, you're talking about, this is like God smack talk, right? Talk about competition, right? He's like, are you kidding me? These little bitty humans, you think you're great, and they're going to set themselves. And it says that the Lord laughs at them. And then he inaugurates, he sets his son as the king, as the ultimate, the ruler. You're my son, today I have begotten you. This is a coronation psalm that actually became in the Davidic dynasty after King David. This became a psalm that was used in the kingly liturgy. So when they would inaugurate a new king, they would quote Psalm 2 as a recognizing it as a coronation of the new king. The back end, bookend, which we'll look at in a second, Psalm 110, also a coronation psalm. Just kind of gives us the ideas that we're setting up Jesus here so that we see Jesus in all that God wants us to see about Jesus. It's not about angels here, it's about Jesus. Begotten. Now this word begotten is a really interesting word. It's an important word. We probably know it most famously from John 3:16, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Begotten is actually used in a number of different other, what I would call false religious systems that would look at the scriptures and say, hey, Jesus was a created being. It says right here in Hebrews chapter 1 that he was begotten, that he was created. This is, again, a quotation of Psalm number 2 where Jesus was begotten, he was created. So John 3:16, Jesus was begotten, he was created. And that's not the case because the word begotten has nothing to do with creation. It has everything to do with primacy. What the word is saying to us is that as Jesus has been set upon the throne, he has been inaugurated as the king, as the Lord over all creation. This is all about primacy here and confirming his kingship, his authority, his enthronement, his son status, his supremacy. You are my son. Today I have begotten you. You are primary over everything. Or again, it says, I will be a father. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. This is a quotation of 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse number 14. This is a passage talking about David, King David, right? But the interesting thing is as he's saying, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son, right? This King David, this sign began to be interpreted shortly thereafter as a messianic term, right? So this is talking a reference not to David himself, but to Jesus, the coming Messiah, a reference to the Messiah as the Son of God. So I will be a father to him, and he shall be to me a son. And again, verse 6, and again, when he brings the firstborn into the world, he says, let all God's angels worship him. Firstborn is a really interesting phrase. Some things that's happening grammatically that tie actually all the way back to verse number 1 and 2. You remember it said long ago. That's before Jesus was incarnate, before he was set upon the throne after his death, burial, and resurrection long ago. But now in these last days, verse 2 says, in these last days, in the days that Jesus has been resurrected, that he has been fully shown and seen as king, as Messiah. Now in these last days, God has spoken through his son. So he brings the firstborn into the world, and he says, let all of God's angels worship him, which actually is a very biblical reference to one of the roles of angels, right? Not to get two people to fall in love with each other, but to actually worship Jesus. They were created beings, created for the worship of Christ. So the point here, again, is not really a comparison of Jesus versus angels, but a presentation that Jesus is God. Right? We have to be able to see this, that Jesus is God. That's what the author is drawing our attention to as we continue on in verse number 7. Or of the angels, he says. This is a comparison. He makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. So this is a quotation of Psalm 104, verse number 4. Again, you have time in your small groups to kind of unpack that and look at that a little bit more. But Psalm 104, Psalm 104 is actually considered a nature psalm. It's an apologetic treatment of who God is compared to nature. So in this particular passage, in this particular quotation, it says that his angels are winds and his ministers a flame of fire. So again, ministers being a role of angels meant to carry out God's business. His ministers are flames of fire. Have you ever watched and looked at wind and fire? I mean, obviously we can't see the wind. We see the effects of wind, right? There's a few things that we know about wind and fire. There's just a lot of unknowns, right? Wind and fire, they're completely unpredictable, right? Sometimes they're destructive, but they're never, ever the same. Always changing, and they come and go. They're temporal. Right? It actually says in verse number 11 and 12 that they're perishable. Like they'll get worn out like a robe or a garment. It's going to get changed. We contrast the angels who are temporal in nature with the Son, and it tells us, and if we look through the passage, what does it tell us about the Son? The Son, we see the nature of the Son. He's forever and ever. He loved righteousness and he hated wickedness. He laid the foundation in the beginning. That's a direct reference to Genesis 1:1, the very first 3 words of the Bible, in the beginning. Like Jesus was there. He laid the foundation. The heavens are the work of his hands. And I love this phrase, but you remain, right? We see this contrast between the winds that come and go and shift and change and the fires that come and go. If you ever sat at a campfire and just been mesmerized by the fire, right? Part of the reason why we're, I think, mesmerized is because it's never the same. It's always different. But Jesus, he will remain. He's not going to be like a garment rolled up and thrown out. He's the same, and his years have no end. So on one hand, we have angels, temporary, created beings, unpredictable, never the same, always changing. And on the other hand, we have the Son, the Messiah, Jesus, enthroned, constant, dependable. He remains. He's eternal. He's faithful. Many things compete for your heart, but only Jesus is worthy. Verse 13, the last section here, this is repeated from verse number 5. And to which of the angels has he said, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet? That's a quotation of Psalm 110, verse number 1. It says, sit at my right hand. We saw this last week in the first handful of verses where we see Jesus, after he had made payment for sin, right? After making purification for sin, he sat down. This is, again, a confirmation of kingship, of authority, of enthronement, of son status. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. They're all under you. He says, are they not ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who are to inherit salvation? Again, another role of the angels, ministering spirits sent out by God for those who are to inherit salvation, right? That would be us today if you're a believer, a follower of Jesus. Those who are to inherit salvation. These last 3 words in this sentence, in this section, actually set the tone for the rest of the book. It introduces this idea of, in the ESV, which is your journaling Bible, if you have a different translation, it might say about to. It's the Greek word melontos. It's kind of the reality of something promised, but not yet fully realized. And here's the tension that we'll see throughout the rest of the book is something that's already, but not yet. Jesus has already conquered, but he has yet to fully put away everything. Right? So we have salvation in Jesus, not yet fully realized until we are face to face, until he comes again, until he enacts his throne. Right? So this about to inherit, this inheritance idea is like the receipt of a permanent possession, not something we earn, that's something that's given to us. Inherit salvation. The word used for salvation here and throughout the book of Hebrews is referring to a final, ultimate, fully realized salvation that is to be inherited. Something that is coming, that is fully available through faith in Jesus. We see this throughout the New Testament, but not fully realized until the day in which God sees fit. So as we kind of think through this particular passage, right, and I think through this section on angels, I'm kind of thinking, I'm always asking of the text, like, why does it matter? Right? What does this have to do with me? Right? Is this about angel worship? I don't think so, although there was, again, a rising in Second Temple Judaism, there was a rising movement of people that were beginning to elevate angels a bit because, again, the Old Testament, the law was handed down. We'll look at this a little bit more next week. The law was handed down through angels in a lot of different ways. And so there was an elevation a little bit of angels, but this isn't really about angel worship. If it was, I think we would see a direct exhortation, do not worship angels, right? But rather, this is a comparison. This is about getting us to see that Jesus is God, right? There was still a need for final revelation that God offered in the person of Jesus Christ. So it's more about the object of our attention, of our worship, of our recognition. So we ask, is it Jesus? Is it Jesus that captivates? Is it Jesus that rules in my life? Or are there other things that compete? And so I think based on what we see in the scriptures here, and based on what we know about angels, I think there's kind of just three things by points of application that compete for our attention, for our worship, for our affection. The first is beauty, right? Angels were beautiful beings. And here's what I know about humans. We like pretty shiny things, right? We like material things. We like stuff. And I think it's a natural temptation for humanity to seek satisfaction in material things. We say things like, if I only had this job and I would make this much money, then I would really be happy. If I only had this house and all my family would come and the problems would be restored, because it's all about where we live and not about what's going on in our relationships. If I had this car, then people would think that I was accomplished or I would just really enjoy it. Right? Sometimes it's not material things, but it's things like, if only my child, careful parents, right? If only my child was the top of their class, then I would feel like a good parent, right? What if my kid was the player of the year, was the team MVP, right? And then everything in our lives begins to push towards that, the realization of that goal as a material thing, as something that was never designed to satisfy. If we're not careful, we can easily attach our identity, our value, and our worth to shiny, pretty things. But we have to be careful, because just like the wind and the fire, they shift and they're unpredictable. So we have to pay attention to beauty. Second is power. If there's something that tops pretty things, it's power, right? We chase power, we strive for power, we want to be at the top. Sometimes that's why we're so competitive, right? Because we're like, man, this is the ultimate, right? And we've seen this in corporate environments for sure. Like you've seen power grabs, I'm sure, but listen, power grabs aren't just in corporate America, Power grabs happen in every context because there's always things competing for our heart, for our attention, for our affection, always. So listen, if you take a cup of coffee to your boss, right? Not just because you want to be nice to him. Maybe that's the case, and if that's the case, good for you, right? But you know the guy, right? You know the lady that does this in your office, takes a coffee for the boss because maybe there's a string attached, or maybe there's a few extra minutes that I get to talk with him or her. Right? Maybe it's, I'm going to take the best gift for Teacher Appreciation Week and send it with my kid. Right? So that maybe there's some favor, right, that can be established. Maybe there's some power, I can assert myself a little bit and have some influence with this teacher if I do that. Now, I'm not against sending gifts to your teachers by any means. My wife's an educator, you know that. So, especially in high school, most high school teachers get very few teacher appreciation gifts. So if you have a high school kid, like send a teacher appreciation gift with your high school, right? Just saying. But I've also heard stories of elementary age teachers who've gotten $200 gift cards to Starbucks for teacher appreciation gift. Right? And again, if you're doing it out of the generosity of your heart, praise God, do it, right? Do it fairly, do it with all of your teachers. That's an amazing thing. But if there are strings attached, do not be mistaken that is a power grab 100%. I've seen it in the church a ton. Right? Deacons do it. I've seen Sunday school teachers do it. Small group leaders do it. Sometimes I've seen pastors do it. And they want that power, right? And there's these power grabs. Listen, whatever power or influence or favor you might gain, there will be a day when it's just rolled up like a garment that's used. And it's going to be tossed out. And Jesus has all the power. He spoke creation into being and he sustains it by the word of his power, it says in verse number 3. Right? Many things compete for our heart, but only Jesus is worthy. So don't live under the illusion that there are other options. Beauty, power. The third, I would just say, is authority. Authority is like the ultimate flex. Right? It rivals power for sure, but it's more than sheer might. Authority, by definition, is the right to control or command and or determine. Right? Here's what authority comes down to. Authority comes down to decision making. Who gets to tell who what to do? Here's one thing I've learned about people. I'm sure it's not you. Some people, right, don't like to be told what to do. You know what I'm talking about? That's an authority issue. And it's something we pick up from the earliest of age. I consider it a blessing to have my niece here as part of our church. Her and her husband, Brendan, are over here. They run our youth department. And they have a daughter, my great niece, right? Renee, she's 1.5. She's the cutest thing ever. If you have another kid that's 1.5, I'm sorry, she's cuter. Right? So Renee, she's 1.5, man. And she picked up a word not too long ago, and that word is no. For me, it's great. I think it's hilarious, right? Because I'm not the mom. But man, if you ask her a yes or no question, you know what she's going to say most of the time is no. Do you want this? No. Do you want this? No. Do you want this? No. Now, if you ask her if she wants pizza, she's going to say yes. She likes pizza, right? Because I think this is just part of who we are as people, as humanity. We don't like to be told what to do. We don't like it. But I don't know if you've ever read the Bible. The Bible is full of stories of people who have tried to assert their authority. Go back to Genesis chapter 11, very beginning, first book of the whole entire Bible. Back in the day, like, everybody spoke one language. There had already been some major failures. You have the fall of man in Genesis chapter 3. You have Noah and the ark and the destruction there, and Genesis 5, 6, 7, in those chapters. And then in chapter 11, here's what people decide they're going to do. They're going to build a tower, right, that reaches to the heavens. And it actually says in Genesis 11:4, it says, let us make a name for ourselves. And it's like Psalm 2. God just looks down and he's like, oh, look at these cute little people, right? He says, I'm going to confuse their language. I don't know if you've ever had somebody speaking to you in a different language, a language that you don't understand. And you're like, I don't know what's happening here, right? Genesis 11, Tower of Babel. Right? When I think about people that have tried to assert their own authority, do their own things, I go back to Israel on the bank of the Jordan River, right? In Numbers chapter 13 and 14. They have all these promises of God and this promise given to them that they're going to have this promised land and it's going to be the land of milk and honey. And God has done some miraculous things, and he's brought up these leaders, and even though they were enslaved in Egypt, God preserved them through Joseph. And then, there's Moses comes on the scene, and they have this 10 plagues and this miraculous rescue from God, and the Red Sea parts, and they cross over, and everything's awesome. The whole Egyptian army wiped out, and they get to the banks of the Jordan. On the other side is the promised land, everything that God said he was going to do for them. And they send spies over, and they look at the land, and they're like, nope, not for us. Right? That's a scary place. And they let fear win, and they ignore God's instructions. When I think about Psalm 2, let me just read a bit of Psalm 2 for you. I mentioned it several times. It's obviously quoted in our text. This is what it says, Psalm 2, verse 2. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. And they say, let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. Literally, these people think that they're going to put God away and his anointed, the Messiah, Jesus. And it says in verse 4, he who sits in the heavens laughs. Many things compete for our heart, but only Jesus is worthy. Satan himself was created an angel. His name was Lucifer, and the Bible talks about it in a few different places. The prophet Isaiah says this in Isaiah 14. He says, how are you fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven and I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High. The prophet says, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. The prophet Ezekiel in Ezekiel 28 says this, Lucifer was the signet of perfection. He was blameless until unrighteousness was found in him. It says that God says to him, I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God. Your heart was proud because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom, and I casted you to the ground. Jesus says it this way in John chapter 8, verse 44. Speaking of Satan, he was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. A fallen angel, the master deceiver. And here's what he whispers in our ears. This is better. He's trying to tell you, I'm stronger than this. You can do this on your own. You don't need Jesus. And it's lie after lie after lie. And there's a competition in your heart right now, today. And just as the angels weren't meant to rule, neither were any of the things in your hearts competing for your attention and your affection. And Hebrews shows us that there's only one champion for your heart and your life. Satan himself tried, and he promised worth, and he promised wisdom, and he promised authority, and all of those things were false. False words, false wisdom, false authority. And he failed, but his lies continue. You can do it on your own. You can be enough. You don't need Jesus. You can figure this out. You can make your own decisions. Listen to me, don't settle for competitors that will never satisfy. So let me ask you this as we're done. What's competing for your heart right now? What's competing for your heart right now? Where do you hear that whisper? This is better. Name it. Write it down. Share it with your spouse. Bring it to your small group. And bring it to Jesus. He is the only one who can satisfy. God's Son, the victorious King, the eternal Creator, the final revelation, our Savior, Jesus. Only Jesus can satisfy your longing for meaning and hope. Only Jesus is worthy. Only Jesus remains when every other pretender fades. The question is, will we trust him?